maybe it was about the time I turned 40 where I had the type of success that I was looking for. I had the financial success. I had a family, I had children, I had lined everything up the way that I'd wanted it. Everything was just exactly as I had set out to make it. And not realizing then that I wasn't happy, because the truth is you're under so much stress as an entrepreneur that not much else shows through. You're just loaded with anxiety all day, every day. And when the anxiety fades, there's usually some depression left underneath that. So that lasted for quite a while. And once I got to what I consider to be the success, the financial success, I stayed in that state for at least 15 years of just trying to, all the time I would look around and say, if I'm not happy, nobody can be happy because I've got everything that I wanted. What's wrong with me?
Exactly.
And it took a while. I was almost kind of tricked into it. But then some things happened in my life that caused me to start to reflect a little bit more, and really think about what it was that made me happy, and started to understand the differences between pleasure and happiness, what caused one, and which were lasting, and then just started down a path almost inadvertently that led me to a variety of changes, including sobriety.
Hello, I'm John Brink, and we are podcasting on the Brink from downtown Prince George, British Columbia, Canada. And for all those people watching us from around the world, they're saying, okay, we know where Canada is. British Columbia on the west coast, right? Right. And we have a big city there called Vancouver. Well, we are 500 miles north of Vancouver, or 800 kilometers. And Prince George, interesting city, about 80,000 people around us. Within 50 miles, we got 100 lakes, lots of timber, lots of friends in nature, black bears, grizzly bears, caribou, deer, foxes, wolves, you name it. We have them all. We call it paradise. Today, we got a very, very interesting guest. His name is Rick Culleton. Rick is a successful entrepreneur and an author and mindfulness advocate who has learned firsthand that happiness is found in wealth, success, keeping up with the Joneses, is cultivated from within. Rick, welcome to the show.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so where are you located, Rick?
Well, I move around quite a bit. I'm actually where I call home today, Austin, Texas.
Austin, Texas. Okay, and so maybe give us a bit of a background on yourself. Where were you born, in which region? And obviously, you have a very, very interesting background. Tell us about your background, your education, and how did you, and obviously, you're an author as well. How did you get to, uh, you know, in the profession that you are now and being so involved? Give us a bit of the background about yourself first.
Well, I was born in upstate New York in 1966, and about the time I finished with my formal education, I was 17 at the time. I realized that there wasn't a lot to do in that part of the world in the mid 80s, and I started looking for another location to start life. And first went to North Carolina, and that didn't work out. And then just a little bit before my 18th birthday, I ended up in Texas. And through some unusual circumstances, I ended up staying there. Before I made it to Texas, I had had a visit to the penal system in New York State, spent a little bit of time in Jamesville Penitentiary as a young man, decided that that wasn't what I wanted to do with my life. And so I came out here and managed to get a job almost immediately, which was surprising from someone from upstate New York because the 80s were tough and jobs were hard to find. And they certainly weren't great. But anyway, I came to Texas, and things changed for the better. In short order, I met the woman who is now my wife, the mother of my two children. Um, Got into entrepreneurship, met some interesting people, And from there, my life really kind of took off. It was quite different than it had been as a child. I suffered from ADHD. I don't know if suffering is the right word, but I was diagnosed with ADHD. Back then they called it ADD and hyperactive disorder of some sort. They had different names for it, but I just kind of found my way here, met some interesting people, people who thought differently of me than I was thought of in New York. I had a lot of encouragement, and I found a lot of interesting things to do that just took me down many different paths.
So the interesting part is being growing up in New York in that region. So it must have been a challenge to you ending up in the wrong environment that got you into some difficulty legally and even spent some time uh, and uh, and then you change your life around totally, and it was in Texas, in Austin, Texas, I presume, where you start meeting your wife and totally changed direction, discovered which you already may have had before, entrepreneurship, looking at opportunity, and obviously from that point forward, you changed your whole life and you became quite successful.
Well, that's true. I mean, I ran into some people, and it definitely the folks I was around changed the direction of my life. But a lot of what I'm doing now has to do with the fact that what I thought was success back then, what I chased, wasn't really what I'm finding success to be today. I set out chasing dollar signs, and that was really my primary objective. As a business owner, as an entrepreneur, that's kind of the goal line. Where this is what we're all said to be after is the almighty dollar, and that's where I spent all of my time. And it wasn't until I had achieved everything that I'd set out to achieve that I realized that I'd been chasing the wrong goal. And it took quite a while. I was there for a bit. I was like, I've done everything that I wanted to do. I've made all this money. I've got homes everywhere, and I can buy whatever I want to buy. And all the other things in my life seemed great. My health was great. My family was amazing, but I wasn't really happy. And it took a lot of internal searching to realize that the reason I wasn't happy is that I had chased the wrong goals. I just dollars didn't make me happy.
How old would you have been? So you started in New York, you were still fairly young, correct me if I'm wrong, when you ended up in Austin, Texas, and then met your wife and then became entrepreneurial, did very, very well, made a lot of money and all of those things, and then concluded this is not what would make me happy. This is not what I really want to do. At what point in your life were you then? How old would you have been? Just out of
Well,
curiosity.
so when I got to Texas, I was 17. I turned 18 shortly thereafter, and
Right.
began dabbling in entrepreneurial things almost immediately. Within the first year or two, I had different ventures going on, small things, but lots of them, trying different things. I had pinball machines and such in sub shops and in a nightclub. I tried buying and selling silver and gold. It was just a variety of things. At one point in time, I went to Las Vegas and was in the used furniture business for a very short period of time in my life. I think all of that happened before I was even 20. And so there were a lot of failures in that entrepreneurial journey. And that's the only way I think that you become a successful entrepreneur is to have numerous failures. The more failures you have, the more set you are to have a couple good successes. But that went on for many years. And then probably somewhere in my early 40s is when I really, maybe it was about the time I turned 40, where I had the type of success that I was looking for. I had the financial success. I had a family, I had children, I had lined everything up the way that I'd wanted it. Everything was just exactly as I had set out to make it. And not realizing then that I wasn't happy, because the truth is you're under so much stress as an entrepreneur that not much else shows through. You're just loaded with anxiety all day, every day. And when the anxiety fades, there's usually some depression left underneath that. So that lasted for quite a while. And once I got to what I consider to be the success, the financial success, I stayed in that state for at least 15 years of just trying to, all the time I would look around and say, if I'm not happy, nobody can be happy because I've got everything that I wanted. What is, what's wrong with me?
Exactly.
And it took a while. I was almost kind of tricked into it, but then some things happened in my life that caused me to start to reflect a little bit more, and really think about what it was that made me happy, and started to understand the differences between pleasure and happiness, what caused one, and which were lasting, and then just started down a path almost inadvertently that led me to a variety of changes, including sobriety. Of course, as an entrepreneur, I wouldn't say that all entrepreneurs do this, but I drank every day 38 years. It was the way to shut it off at the end of the day. You're looking at somebody who suffers from ADHD, or actually probably shouldn't use that word again, suffer, but had ADHD. And I do believe that that's the reason that I was successful as an entrepreneur, is that ADHD gave me so many ideas. Just kept my mind busy all the time. But when you want to shut down at the end of the day, the American way is alcohol. And so that I fell right into that groove. 6 o'clock came along, and I'd start with beer and then move on to wine, and I would drink until I fell asleep. And that was pretty much my way of life. That was how I would shut my brain down. I was still doing other things that were healthy, not realizing that the alcohol was doing bad things to my body and mind and sleep and everything else. And kind of went along with the program for a long time. And it wasn't until I was 56 or 57 years old that I began to realize that this wasn't the way, that I really wasn't happy for a reason, and that I needed to do something about it. And it started with the death of a friend, a coworker, and a final post that he had made on social media about how it's when you discover that the change needs to come from within and you don't need to change the world. And he and I were a bit alike. We'd both done time. We had kids about the same age. He was a very hard worker. He'd worked for me for a while and became an entrepreneur. And we thought a lot alike. And I thought a lot about those comments. And that started my journey into the, at least the beginning thoughts of looking deep inside myself to see if I was making the right choices, and having, I was open to the idea that everything I know could be wrong. And that's a good place to start.
So, so correct me if I am wrong. So you, when you came to Texas and you became entrepreneurial, did a lot of things, made a lot of money, and all those kind of things. Then in your early 40s, then for about 15 years, put you into your mid 50s. A number of things happened that made you think about, am I going in the right direction? I'm not happy. This is not what I should be looking for. What were those things other than that a friend of yours passed away that gave you attention in terms of likely what am I doing? Were there other issues that kind of created a situation that you said, I have to change direction?
Yes, I was having a lot of anxiety, um, about business, about life, about getting older, about money, um, worrying about things that I even realized at the time either weren't things that I could control, that I should just forget about, or were things that I really didn't need to worry about at all. And one day, I believe it was in 2023, I received an email from a woman by the name of Julie Hutchinson, who runs a program called Core Performance. And it said, "Do you want to wake up happy?" And the subject line caught me. I was like, because I was waking up in anxiety. I was shaking. I would physically be trembling most days when I woke up out of bed. And I would need to get out of bed quickly because it wasn't a good place. And it went on to describe my life pretty well. And I showed it to my wife, and I said, I think this woman's been looking through the windows and watching me because she knows what's wrong with my entire situation here. It really got my attention. So I emailed her back and I said, "Yeah, I sure would like to wake up happy. That sounds like a great plan." And we talked a bit. It was towards the end of the year, and I believe it was 2023. And I got involved in a program she had with Core Performance beginning in 2024. And even before I'd started the program, it was about a month lag, and I was traveling quite a bit, getting ready to embark on this journey, and thinking a lot about change. And I began to change just by thinking about the possibility of change and the possibility that I wouldn't have anxiety all my life, and the idea that had been rumbling around my head that happiness didn't have a dollar sign in front of it. And then I started that course, and a lot happened. The first thing that happened to me was I got tricked into meditation. We called them breathing exercises, and I can be a bit naive at times, but I did those for quite a while. I would say months before I realized that I was learning how to meditate. And as I went through that program and I got better and better using a tool called Inner Balance and learned to meditate, we were working on scores and so forth, the anxiety began to melt away quickly. And that really gave me some clarity into where I wanted to go with my life. It's the anxiety served a purpose 15,000 years ago. All of these things that plague us in the modern day were purposeful when we were cavemen. They all of these things that cause us difficulty now served a purpose, and the anxiety was there probably to keep us from getting eaten by one of your bears or something of that sort. But there weren't any bears in my bedroom, and it wasn't doing me any good at all to wake up full of anxiety in the morning, and I knew that. And as I worked through that program, the anxiety faded. And one of the things that I found very funny about all of this is when she started, she told me almost a month in, you're going to find that you probably don't want to drink anymore, that you won't want as much alcohol as you're consuming. And I was still very content with my alcohol consumption. I looked forward to it every day, and I kind of laughed it off. I said, well, that's not my goal here. I have absolutely no desire to quit drinking. And I kept on with the program. Lo and behold, somewhere around 100 days in, maybe 4 months in, I just quit drinking one day. I threw it all down the trash chute in my apartment in Manhattan. I was headed to Buenos Aires. I changed my ticket and I came back to Texas to stay with my wife. That was over a year ago. And I haven't had a drink since. And that was another big step for me. Um, it, this journey is different for everyone, but for me, removing the alcohol was a big part. That was the next layer of fog that was removed to help me see my path forward.
The interesting part here, Rick, is that kind of looking through your timeline, correct me if I'm wrong, you've been with your wife for many, many years, I believe. And
Yes.
and somehow in all the adversity is why did she stay through the difficulty is my question. And why is she still there today is my question.
Well, I guess we're still together because she's my soulmate. And, as much as I had all of these problems, I was pretty good at containing them. I was an alcoholic. I had tremendous anxiety. But to put it in perspective, we I was not an angry drunk. We never had arguments. I never got a DWI. I never missed a day of work. I was a different kind of alcoholic. I was the textbook functioning alcoholic. In fact, if you'd asked me, I would have told you I'd never had a hangover in my life. It wasn't until after I quit drinking that I realized I'd been hungover every single day of my life. So she didn't really have, there wasn't a lot of negative output from me. Being around me wasn't a negative thing. I still had a lot of energy. I worked out. I was very healthy. I was doing triathlons and taekwondo and keeping myself fit and keeping the demons at bay a lot of time through physical exercise and alcohol. They were both doing a lot of the same thing through some of my toughest times when I was going head to head with the federal government here in the United States. I turned to pretty intense exercise. I got into fighting. I was in the ring pretty regularly. I was doing long distance rides, bike and triathlons and lots of taekwondo. I rode my bike from London to Paris on one trip and just um, kind of use that as some sort of protection mechanism. At the time, I didn't realize what I was doing. But to answer that was a long answer to your question, but there wasn't a lot of negativity in our relationship. We've had a very healthy relationship all the way through, despite my anxiety and depression or depressive mood.
So then that kind of brings us more to where we are now, is because you became an author, and I have a copy of you. Have you got your book close by that you can show us?
I
You can
don't.
reach for it or
No, I don't think
find
I
it.
have. I've given them away. I don't have any more here.
So so messed up like you, and is the title of the book. Very interesting title. Now, I'm also an author, and writing books is not easy. And so and obviously, the I like what you did, and so when did you start writing or thinking about writing and then writing?
Well, John, that's an interesting story in that I never intended to be an author. I can't even spell. So my formal education ended at 17. I'm the last person in the world that I thought should have been writing books. But my daughter bought me a gift in somewhere around 2021 or so, maybe a little earlier. It was a subscription called Storyworth, and it was a they would send me an email every week, and I would have to answer a question. And I understood that these were going to become some sort of essay or publication of some sort that I would review at some point in time. And each week I was diligent about it. I would answer the questions that they sent me. And about 3 months into this, maybe earlier, I got an email from my mother. And it read something like, "I didn't know you saw something that way," or something like that. And it was just, oh my gosh, where are you getting these? I didn't realize that these were even being distributed to anybody. So what I was writing was being sent to some people that my daughter had signed up on this gift. So then I went to looking to see what my privacy settings were and all of this and who was getting what. And I'd been very open in my writing. And I saw that these people could see what was being written by default. And then I had the ability to make some of it public. So at that point, I went back through and picked a few things that I thought were worthy of making public, that maybe somebody could get some benefit from, and did. About 3 months after that, I was contacted by a woman who just sent me an email and said, "I have found your stories fascinating, and I think people really need to hear this." So I was just kind of in the back of my mind for a while. And then at the end of the year, before I had even finished the last question, before I had proofread anything, my daughter printed the book and gave it out as Christmas gifts. So here's here's my I mean, just like everything open, like I was writing to myself, at least for the first 3 months, completely writing to myself. Nothing had been edited. This all gets pushed out in a book. And then after reading that and taking what this woman had taken into consideration, I thought, maybe I do have something that could help somebody. And that's where the book started. And talking to another author, you will appreciate this more than the rest of the world. I had no idea what I was getting. I thought I was going to write a book and I'd upload it to Amazon and people would buy it if they wanted to. So one is, I never dreamed that the book would be as successful as it was. I never would have taken that project on the first time if I had any idea what I was getting into. I learned so much along the way, and it doesn't take one person to write a book. It takes a team. And in the end, I learned, I don't even remember all the titles of the people. Some of them were just, I remember the interior designer is the one that always comes to mind, because we had to wait for that person to do their job before the exterior designer could finish, because until the interior designer finished, we didn't know how many pages the book was going to be. And then the exterior designer couldn't do the spine of the book. And I'm sure you've been through all of this stuff, but
All of
this,
that, yeah.
and the new book that we're working on is going to be incredible. I mean, it's absolutely going to be amazing. That book is already available, and that's a very niche book. I mean, Messed Up Like You that book is aimed at a younger version of myself, someone who has ADHD, or possibly the parent of a person who has ADHD, to give them a little bit of insight into what goes on inside the brain of a person. And I I don't take medication for ADHD. I have taught young children who have been medicated. I see parents who are just distraught with these kids, and most of them don't realize what a gift it is. It's something that needs to be learned to be. It's a superpower that needs to be learned to be managed. It's it can be dangerous, but once you have control of it, it's a great tool. I couldn't imagine living any other way. But still, today, it's something that people feel that they need to deal with, and I think you do in younger children. It's to some extent you need to at least consider it when you're educating them and living with them. That's what's going on in the background.
So the other part of you is so interesting. Your wife has been with you for a long time. You want to give us her first name?
Catherine, her name is Catherine, and we
Catherine.
have
And then you have one daughter, I know. How many children do you have?
We have two children. We have a son, Richard, and a daughter, Laura. Richard is now, and this is as we're talking in 2025, Richard is 29 and Laura is 27.
And Laura was the one that got you the inspiration for the book, really, right?
Yes.
Yes. So interesting. And so, just give you just a little bit of background on myself. I'm a little bit older than you. I was born in 1940 in northeastern Holland, just before the Second World War started. And my mom and dad were married and were in love and got married in 1938. And my dad had a job at a lumber mill, and so they rented a beautiful little house, and very quickly they had a boy and a girl, and they were in love. And then obviously what happened in 1938 already quickly, and a fellow by the name of Adolf Hitler decided to invade Poland and take part of Poland and make it part of Germany, and then put his eyes on Western Europe in particular, including Holland. And so my dad then, in April of 1940, was drafted into the Dutch army. And the last time that they heard from him was when the bombing of Rotterdam happened, because Adolf Hitler felt that Holland didn't capitalize quick enough for him, so he bombed the center of Rotterdam, a huge city. And the last time they heard from my dad, when he was seen in Rotterdam. And so for 5 years, they didn't know if he was dead or alive. So it was a tough go from there on forward. Obviously, Hitler invaded Holland, took control of it very, very quickly in a blitzkrieg. And those stories are important to me because we celebrate now 80 years ago that I remember being liberated by the Canadian Army in April the 12th in 1945, and I was about 44, nearly 5 years old, and I remember it well, the Canadian Army coming in, and it made such an impression on me that I knew that when I grew up, I would go to the land of my heroes, Canada. And so, and I always stayed with me. We saw far too much of that we should not have seen. During the difficult times, there was a period in particular, 1944, where Hitler had cut off all the food supply to Holland and Northern Holland. And I remember going every morning with my brother and sister into the railroad yards with gunny sacks to pick up anything edible and burnable, because there was nothing to eat. And now, even 80 years later, I can still feel the feeling of hunger. And a lot of kids, young persons died, and older ones died during that period. So it was a tough go. And in a way, it's a special date was May the 5th, when Europe was liberated, or the Germans capitulated, and so that was the end of the war. But it took still a long time before things got back to anything resembling normal. In some cases, it took generations for me, I still am affected even now still by PTSD. And then a child got counseling for that actually when I was in my 50s. And so the story is that for a lot of people that, especially in a world that we see today, where there are so many challenges, Eastern Europe comes to mind, Middle East, and then we in North America are so fortunate that in a democratic rule that is so important. And I fly around a lot, do a lot of businesses, both in the United States and in Canada. And I usually sit by the window in the plane and I'd say, it's paradise. How lucky we are. And so saw far too much for me during the Second World War. Too many people, too many bodies, that dead bodies, and people being dragged out of their houses always stayed with me. So academically, I was not a success story. I failed grade 3 and I failed grade 7 3 times. And then they said to my parents, what are we going to do with this guy? And some people said, send him to the mentally challenged school. They said, no, we're not going to do that. So what we do is we will get him a job. So they got me a job. My dad had a friend that had a furniture factory. So at 12 and a half years old, failing grade 7 for the 3rd time, they got me a job at a furniture factory. And kids are hard on each other. The friends that I used to have that went to college and university, they looked down on me. I was a laborer. I'm proud of that today. But then it was kind of looked at as, being too dumb, too challenged, and even the teachers would say, well, John, nice guy, but he will not amount to much in his life, unfortunately. And so that's kind of what it was. But I always felt myself in my own little world that I was just as smart as the other ones. Not better than, but just as smart. But I really never knew, who am I? And I already was quite successful in Holland. And then when I was 24, I decided to go to the land of my heroes. And then the other part that I wanted to do, could speak the language, didn't know a soul, didn't have a job, is that I wanted to build a lumber mill to prove to me that I could do it. And I wanted to start with nothing. And so I left Holland at 24. I had a suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and very little money. I knew I wanted to go to Canada. I wanted to go to British Columbia, and I wanted to start from nothing. And so flew into Montreal, took the train across Canada, 4 days, 5 nights. My God, that is a long way. Anyway, so when I came to Vancouver, went to the immigration office, and so fortunately there was a German fellow. I could speak some German. I could speak no English. And I told him what I wanted to do. I wanted to build a lumber mill. He said, go to Prince George. That's where they're building all the mills, all the pulp mills. That's where the opportunities are. That's where I am today. I can look out of the window, and about 4 blocks away, I can still see where the Greyhound station was. 12, 13 hours on the Greyhound bus. Came off the bus here with my suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, counted my money at least 3 times. I had exactly $25.47. But what I did have lots of attitude. I'm always positive, and even then already, even now, passion. Whatever I do, I give it 125%. And work ethic, even now, is that I still work harder than anybody. Is I get up at 5:30 in the morning. I always make my bed, and I always think I'm late. And that's what I do now. And yes, I did build a mill and a number of other things. But the one part that I had, Rick, is that I didn't know, who am I? Why am I different? And until I already was successful and had a number of companies, but I still was challenged by, and people said, you're so successful and blah, blah, blah. I didn't feel that way. And until I walked into a store here after I had been here for 32 years. I came here in 1965, with nothing. Very quickly So I started as a cleaner man, very quickly became a foreman, a superintendent, and before started then my own companies after 10 years, and now we have 10 different companies or something like that, but it's not about that. But I walked into a store after I had been here for 32 years, and I picked up a book. I have the actual book here that I picked up that changed my life. And the title of the book is Driven to Distraction by Dr. Halliwell. And the book, and as I went through the book, it talked about ADHD and dyslexia. I said, oh my God, that's me. And I wrote in it, January 1997, I wrote it in Dutch because the suggestion was ADHD is a mental disorder of some description. And I wrote in Dutch here. This is the actual book. I wrote in Dutch. Now I finally know who I am. And so as I read the book and then started looking at Google more, the more I looked at it, the more I said, it's a superpower. And so it took me 5 years till I was 62, and this was 57 when I picked up the book. I went to my doc, who delivered our two daughters and was a personal friend. And he said, hey, John, why are you here? I said, I think I got ADHD. And so we looked at it, we checked it out. Yes, I do. So the challenge then, from my perspective, was that I already then was convinced this is a superpower. And so it explained a lot of things in my life. And so then from that point forward, I started to look at my life differently, but to put it into perspective, at that point I was 62 years old. I left school at grade 7, failed it 3 times. I was 12 and a half years old, wondering who I was for 50 years. But it changed my life, going the Second World War, liberation by the Canadians, making the decision to go to Canada, start with nothing, to find out who am I, and can I do this on my own and go to northern British Columbia. I went through all of it, and then somebody said to me about, and many times, he said, John, you had such an interesting life, you should write a book about it. And as I heard said, writing books is not easy. So I went through that for about 20 years, stop, start, until about 6 years ago when I was in my mid-70s. If I don't write it now, it will never happen. So I did. I wrote the book Against All Odds. And it's not about hurrah, hurrah, how successful John is, but to the contrary, going through all the ups and downs. And so the book quite successful. And then from that point forward, the more I found out about ADHD and that frequency of occurrence. Now, the other part that you may find interesting, Rick, is that you're my podcast number 410, where I'm hosting. Podcast number 203, I did a podcast with Dr. Halliwell.
Oh, wow.
And so Dr. Halliwell wrote this book in 1993. I bought it in 1997. I podcasted Dr. Halliwell last year, I believe, in my podcast On the Brink 203. It's on all the major areas, including YouTube and the other ones. And so the interesting part about our interview were that by then I had concluded from what I knew is that the frequency of occurrence of ADHD, I thought maybe around 8% or something like that. And I suggested that Dr. Halliwell, he's the expert, he's a professor known globally for his views on ADHD and other things that are related to it, is that I suggested to Dr. Halliwell is that I believe that it is probably 20%. He said, no, John, it's more than 25%. I agree with him Now, the other thing that happened in my life, I got to know a lot of entrepreneurs and business people, very, very successful. I'm numerous boards of directors and all those kind of things. And I suggested to Dr. Helliwell that I believe on the successful is the operative. Entrepreneurs and business people, I believe that 50% of them are ADHD. He said, no, John, probably 75%. I agree with him. And so that's kind of is my story in a way, and the similarities between you and me are likely. I went through a difficult period in the 1990s, 95, but I started the stress and all the other things, anxiety and all the issues that you raised, some of the ones I knew, other ones that I did not know, obviously ADHD being one of them, and dyslexia. I started drinking more than was good for me. I still was smoking, pipe and cigarettes, and then at the same time was taking pills for anxiety, and so and then it got to the point that now my wife, we've been together for 42 years. At some point, that's why I asked you the question. She kind of hit me with a 2x4 and said, I'm leaving you. And so that woke me up in terms of saying, I stopped drinking, I stopped smoking, and Xanax was the pills that I was using. Stopped everything in 1 week. The one that was the hardest to quit was Xanax. And so, but since that time, I don't smoke, I don't drink, and obviously I don't use any Xanax. But she kind of changed my life by saying stop. And so that's what happened. And then from that point forward, I started writing more. And then the other part that made a difference in my life is that up to probably 1990, I was not a good communicator. I had anxiety, I had lack of self-confidence, and although I was already successful in business, but all that stuff troubled me, and I could communicate well in my company with about 3 or 4 people, but outside of that, I wasn't until I went to an organization called Toastmasters, and the first time that I went there, somebody said, you should come with me to Toastmasters. And I said, but what do they do? It's about developing communication skills. I said, are they going to ask me any questions? He said, no, you just sit and just watch it. So I was there for about half the meeting. Then somebody said, hey, John, tell us all about you. I said, oh, my God, I'll never go back here. And so, but I did. I stayed there for 10 years and became a distinguished Toastmaster, and that changed my life. So in combination of all those things, it brought me to, as a late bloomer, it was not until I was 62 that I was diagnosed. From that point forward, I started writing and became a presenter and a speaker. And then at the same time, obviously, I started podcasting, being very successful. And the last book that I'm doing, I did the one with ADHD. This is another one that I did, and you can relate to that. Living Young, Dying Old, is that in the mid-'80s. This is a picture of me. I'm the oldest competitive bodybuilder in North America. And so by coincidence, because I thought, and again, something that changed my life is that in 2008, when I nearly died of diverticulitis that breached, and all of a sudden, although my wife was a vegetarian, I got the message that I had to look at my diet more carefully and go. Up to that point, I was just like everybody else. At the end of the year, we make a commitment. We're going to go to the gym, and we do this, that, and the other thing, and then we buy a membership for the gym. And after 2 weeks, we can find 100 reasons why we're too busy to go to the gym. So I got somebody to work with me. I've done that now for 16 years, and it became a competitor in bodybuilding and physique, first in Northern BC, then provincially came second, third. That qualified for the Nationals and the Arnolds, and now then COVID came, and now again I'm training for when I'm 86 to go to the Arnolds, and just the way I look. And so, and my message is that everything is possible. Age is just a number. It's quality of life that counts. So that kind of shows you our similarities. And then the other one, I should add one more, is to the book that I'm now writing and is already written. It comes out in June. And that's about communication skills and the importance of that. So there we are, Rick. We have quite a few things in common.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do. Yeah, I'm an ex-smoker, ex-drinker, and maybe it's I don't know. It's putting all that stuff behind you gives you perspective, and I think that if I had just come out clean from the start, things would be different. I had to go through a lot of that stuff to get to where I am today, and although I wouldn't make the same decisions again if I had another life to do over, I don't regret any of those things because all of that stuff brought me to where I am here and now. But it's a different world. I don't think I would make the same mistakes. And you're older than I am, so you know that picking up a pack of cigarettes when you're a kid. I started smoking when I was 12. The
Yeah.
warnings on the cigarettes were very mild. It's like you might get sick, and it just and even with the alcohol, and then the packaging got more aggressive later on, but you could, as a kid, I could go to a store or outside a bar and buy cigarettes for 35 cents out of a machine. Nobody ever asked you for any ID. And,
No.
alcohol quickly became the same way at a very, very young age. We started to drink.
Everybody was drinking. Right? Everybody was smoking, right? So
Yeah.
if
So education has come a long way. The kids today, my children do not drink,
no,
not to the extent that I did. They don't
no,
smoke.
no,
The kids are smarter today in that regard by a long ways.
exactly.
Um, But those are all things in our past that make us who we are today.
Yeah, and that's kind of the way I feel about it, is that there isn't much I could have done about it in a lot of cases, the way they were, but I don't regret having had exposure to the difficult periods during the war years. Like a lot of people now look at war and think respectfully that after the war is over, everything goes back to normal. Well, it doesn't. It may take generations, and how lucky we are in North America, so where we live, and how fortunate we are compared to a lot of people that live in Russia and the Middle East and China and Venezuela and Cuba and on and on and on and on. So we are so lucky, so fortunate.
I agree.
So so now what you're doing now is you're working on another book.
I am.
So one of the more challenging parts is with books is finding the title for the book. How was your experience there?
There's lots of challenging parts to writing a book. Creating it, coming up with a title is one. And we've got a couple working titles. This book is coming together much easier than I ever expected to. It just, the flow is so natural, and that I know exactly what needs to be in there to have the impact to have the maximum impact on the biggest number of people. So that part is easy to put together. I don't know that the title is even going to be relevant to the content. It may be something completely off the wall, but this book is all about starting your day in a way that creates a foundation for for happiness and to remove the anxiety and the depressed mood and all of that stuff. Because I believe that we're all naturally happy people when you remove all of you just peel off those layers, and what you get
Right.
underneath is happiness. And you need to understand what happiness is. I mean, it doesn't mean you're giddy running around jumping up and down all day long, but it means that you're not full of anxiety and you don't have a depressed state, and that you're happy and optimistic about life. And these things that I've discovered that make my life so much better are so easy to communicate to people if put in the right context. It's just coming up with a way to get people, as you mentioned just a moment ago about the gym membership. There's so many things like that. I mean, I've got a regimen. I mean, my mornings are, I mean, it's cold plunge. Before I talked to you, I was in the gym. It's in my home. I've already done my cardio. I've got a jam-packed day of physical and mental stuff for me, and I don't expect the rest of the world to adopt a protocol like that. It's not practical. But there are some very key parts of that that don't take as much effort as the entire package I'm doing, that will give you, it's the 80-20 rule. I can give you 80% of the benefit with 20% of the work. And that's what I'm really working to refine, is to give you those 20% of my activities that are going to give you 80% of my results. And for the average person out there, it's going to be a huge lift in their well-being, their mental well-being, and their overall happiness. And some of it's just outlandishly simple, to tell you the
So,
truth.
so the other thing that is important to you, my observation is, and you feel likely the same as I do, is your book talks about being messed up like you. Why do you think embracing imperfection is so powerful? And is the reason that you wrote it and the reason you speak about it and use it in your podcasting is that you want to send a message to people that are struggling now and that it may be helpful to them?
Well, we learn from our mistakes. If you start life out, with a silver spoon in your mouth, and you don't have any mistakes to make and everything is easy, you're doomed. You're just destined for failure. And it's the people who have hardships early on that normally become more successful and probably end up having a happier life in the end. I don't know. It's not really that you get all of your hardships out of the way, because there's certainly more to come, but that's kind of sets the base for expectations. And you're a person that's more willing to accept things than a person, if you're someone who is expecting everything to be beautiful and it's going to be sunny every day and I'm going to have food on the table every day and I don't need to worry about anything. When adversity comes, it's very difficult for you.
Yeah.
Your start was much more difficult than mine. So I can only imagine that you're that much more fortified than I am. But even the difficulties that I had as a young person, I lived on my own from the time I was 16. So, having to provide for myself and knowing that if I didn't come up with some food, there wasn't going to be food in the house, was enough to motivate me to want to go make money to have food.
Right.
It created a work ethic, and it did some other things that I think benefited me long run. But if you if you are a person who looks at trials and tribulations as negatives, and you don't see the value in the bad, you're not going to be tremendously successful in any part of your life. And that goes for relationships, jobs, self employment, family. You have to learn from every single mistake. And every time something bad happens, and this comes with experience, you don't start out this way. Obviously, when you're new at life, a bad experience is a bad experience and you want it over with. Like, holy crap, why did this happen to me? What did I do? Let's get this out of my life. You want to end it as fast as possible. It takes a long time to get here, but this point in my life, when something really bad happens, I'm like, let's see what I learned from this. There's something really good gonna come out of this. And I try to explain it to my wife as well. She's not quite on the program as I am, but for instance, she injured her back. She works out a lot too. She injured her back and has a herniated disc just recently. And I've been cold plunging for a long time, and she, along with a lot of my friends, don't want anything to do with that. Well, when the herniated disc became so painful that she wasn't sleeping well and she had all these other problems, it was very easy for me to coax her to get into that cold plunge, which she just did again today, and she's in there almost every day. I told her the other day, I said, this is the good that's going to come from the bad. That herniated disc is going to teach you to cold plunge, and you're going to be healthier and happier going forward. And those are the kinds of things that we need to be looking at every time something adverse happens to you. And if you sat back and you think about all the things that have happened to you, John, you can probably put together a really long list, and then you start to think about all the things that you learned from each one of these so-called problems that you had in your life, and that's what makes you who you are. Those are the life lessons that add up and make you into the person you are, and it's also partly why you have to be somewhere around our age to really start to change direction and have a real destination in mind, because you can't do it until you've had enough of these negative experiences to give you the life lessons you need to see where it is you need to go.
And to give the value though in terms of saying that, like for me, ADHD was a real experience, and I feel that, and that's why I wrote the book about it, is that fortunately, educational system as we know it, although it's starting to change in a lot of ways from what it used to be, it still has a further distance to go, in my opinion. And and in terms of, and in the book I refer to that, that going to school for me for 3-4 years to learn a trade would not be good for me, because I get bored and I don't have the attention for that. So one of the things that I'm suggesting, and some organizations are doing that, micro certification is the focus should be on the trade that you'd like to teach, and all the other stuff become incidental to it. Doesn't mean that you should not know it, but focusing on the core issues that you want to pursue are very, very important. The other part is important, and you related to that, is that that if there are issues, ADHD is not a liability, and I believe I have an obligation, and as I do, to speak about it wherever it is appropriate. I did a presentation here about 2 months ago to the Alberta government, the province next to us, of their provincial ADHD organization, and those things to me are important. I mention it in my podcasting wherever appropriate. So it was interesting that you raised it, obviously, and the more you spoke about it, the more I started relating to my own story. And is these conversations between yourself, myself, that people around the world, and I believe, as apparently not only Dr. Halliwell do, but others do as well, that maybe up to 30% of the population globally, male and female, although females presented differently than males, but are indirectly affected or benefit from ADHD. And so I feel I have an obligation to speak about it wherever appropriate, and at the same time, like for me, it changed my life.
It's you hit on something there, John, that I think someone with ADHD has a little bit better perspective on than the rest of the world, and that's the education process that we use in the Western world. And when I was a kid, you'd cram 23 children in one room, give them one teacher, and try to teach them all the same thing at the same pace for 45 minutes, and then you would give them 5 minutes and you'd cram them into another class. Well, we know now that we actually learn in intervals of about 12 to 15 minutes, and then you need 20 minutes to process what it is you've learned. It's why cramming for an exam doesn't work, and all of these other methods that they try. And yet today we still try to put children into a room, put one teacher in front of them to teach them all the same thing at the same rate. And it not that you can't teach them anything, but your absorption rate is probably about 15%. You're not going to get we spend so much time to give so little education to people.
Exactly.
That I believe that one of the good things that's going to come out of the era that we're in and all the transformations that we're going to see over the next 5 years, that education is going to take a major turn. We know now that the system we have in place doesn't work, but it's a very big institution. So, the bigger it is, the harder it is to change. We still have public schools everywhere, and we're still putting 23 kids in a room in front of one teacher and hope that she can get through to some of them. or
Same
he.
here. You know.
And so we will get to it. And I hated learning as a child. My education ended at 17, but as an adult, I'm enthralled. I learn so many things. I listen to podcasts all day long. I pick a subject and I'll just listen and listen and listen. And but it is that method of learn, think, absorb, and then go back and learn some more instead of cramming it in 5 days a week, 6 hours a day.
And so usually when I refer to education, then I say formal or life. You know, so obviously for me, you know, some people say to me, does it still bother you that you failed grade 7 3 times? And I said, yeah, it does. It really does. I should have quit earlier. You know, so,
You know,
so
John, when I was at school, at one time they put me in an accelerated class. First, they put me into a grade where it was third and fourth together when I was in the third, with the idea that they might move me from third to fifth. Then the next year, they decided they should hold me back a grade and then decided to put me in my regular. They didn't know what to do with this. I mean,
Rick, so how can people get in contact with you? I'm going to hold your book up once more. It's available to everybody, and obviously Rick has an amazing story, and he's a podcaster as well. You know that subscribe to our podcast that we are doing. It will stimulate us from doing more of these kind of podcasts and about other ones, and share it with others and like it, and then go to. Have you got a website, Rick?
so the website for that book is messeduplikeyou.com. The book that we're currently working on is mydailystack.com, which probably won't end up being the title of the book, but that is where all the good stuff is. There'll be video updates along the way, tips, tricks, places to sign up and get free copies of the book and that sort of stuff. My Daily Stack.
And then for me, you know, so my next book coming out is $1 billion, as we can see here, communication skills, because the foundation, you're a very good communicator. And I believe so am I. I didn't start that way, but the foundation for success in relationships and a lot of other things is becoming an effective and good communicator. And I believe that's what I'm trying to address in that book. This book is coming out in June. And then the other one is that this one, Living Young, Dying Old, it's age is just a number. Quality of life is diet, exercise, get enough sleep. It's nothing magic about mediation, as you touched on. We can go on for another hour, but at some point we have to talk more about this. Rick, it has been a privilege and a pleasure. I'm going to send you copies of my books, all 4 of them, and then at some point, let's stay in touch again. I'm going to get Scott to stay in touch with you. Maybe 6 months or so from now, we'll have another podcast if you are up to it.
That'd be great, John. I'd like to meet you in person, but you'd have to come to the United States. They don't let me in Canada.
I know, you know, so I will do that, you know.
All right.
Thanks, Rick.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.